Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News, South Florida Conservative News Center. It is Monday, June 8th, 12/22. Soft focus for some reason, who knows? This camera is not the best. And we are doing the second part of our coverage of the Los Angeles mayoral debacle because it needs to be done and we need to stay with the math and not get as emotionally tied in as it seems a lot of the people who have viewed the last video did, because the good thing with numbers is you can track them. And so we're going to continue. If you saw the last video, which was Spencer Pratt's less than zero, if you followed the discussion, you'll remember the election night controversy surrounding a vote update that appeared to show Spencer Pratt receiving 0 votes while other candidates accumulated thousands of votes. And the question, of course, was why were those two candidates in one group, considering the second person, Miss Raman, was nowhere near Miss Bass in numbers? There's a lot on that whole thing on it of itself. And of course, Associated Press covered for them and this and that and the other thing. That reporter, of course, should be investigated as this goes along. Election officials and the Associated Press, as I said, later explained that the anomaly resulted from a reporting feed issue, which would not make any sense from any point. And we put that in the last article. You can see that yourself, why that makes no sense at all. But since they are coming from a point of authority, the mindless masses in California went with it. But maybe it's true, and maybe it isn't. And, we're trying to avoid lawsuits as much as everybody else. But that's not what we're talking about today, because the more or most important or interesting question isn't what happened during that less than zero moment. The interesting question is what happened afterwards. Specifically, how did Nithya Raman move from a decent place behind Spencer Pratt to eclipsing Spencer Pratt? And what can the numbers tell us about the voters who made that happen? Okay. So for many voters, elections are fairly straightforward. The polls close, the votes are counted, the winner emerges. That's how we do it in Florida. All right. There may be some adjustments as additional ballots come in, but the broad shape of the race is usually visible on election night. Now, California often works differently depending on the counties and things like that. And they love mail-in ballots, large numbers of mail-in ballots, provisional ballots, cured ballots, double secret ballots continue to be counted for days and even weeks after. This is what they had out, I think, in Arizona, which caused all that brouhaha. That creates what many observers perceive as a second election. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying there are actually two elections. I'm saying that's how it looks to people watching from the outside. Election night produces one story, which was Karen Bass and Spencer Pratt battling it out for the mayorship of Los Angeles, to the following days, which are producing Karen Bass and another socialist Democrat, with the Spencer Pratt, who is not named as a party person, but is down as the Republican in this case. He's the bad guy. And that is exactly what happened in Los Angeles. Karen Bass had a commanding lead. All right. Spencer Pratt occupied second place. They were close, considering, right? Then, as additional ballots were counted, Nithya Raman steadily closed the gap before overtaking Pratt for the second runoff position, but not a huge enough so that she threatened Karen Bass. Because, as those of you who think along the lines of conspiracy, she was just there to get rid of Pratt. Bass wins again. Raman goes off into the sunset to spend her money. The official explanation is simple. Okay. The later ballots came from voters who were more favorable to Raman because she must have had her own box someplace, right? Maybe that's the answer. But if that's the answer, then we need to know how those, who those voters were. And that situation, this is where the conversation is going to become interesting. The issue is not whether ballots were counted. The issue is understanding the composition of the electorate that entered the count after election night. Were they younger voters? Were they renters? Were they concentrated around universities? Were they the people that were homeless that were paid to vote that OMG has been showing us for the last couple of days? Were they in progressive neighborhoods? Did they all have a problem with Spencer Pratt's dog biting their kid? We don't know that. And these are participation questions. They are not accusations or demographic questions, okay? They're mathematical questions. And that's where today's story is going to go. And this is from Karen Bass's own people and then out to the general public. We're going to talk about one precinct, not because it's the most important precinct in Los Angeles, but because it may be one of the most useful if you're trying to investigate what occurred. According to public reporting, a precinct in Gramercy Park delivered approximately 82% of its vote to Karen Bass. 82%, that's a lot, right? Think about that for a moment, okay? Not 52, not 62, 82%. And historically, the last election, she got 75%. So it's only going up, right? So we have 2 election cycles to look at for Karen Bass. And why is this important? The reporting suggests that a comparable precinct, like I said, was 77. And that, I'm sorry. What's interesting about this is if those figures are accurate, then Bass didn't lose support. She gained support, right? Leaving 12% of the voters to be chopped up by whoever. Okay. Her hold on the area is stronger. But if she received 82%, as I've said, then only, 18%. Why am I saying 12? My math is gone. Only 18% remained available for everybody else. And that includes Spencer Pratt, Nithya Raman, and the minor candidates and write-ins and everybody else. Or all of them together, 18%. And brings you to the title of today's thing is, where is this missing 18? And we know Bass's number, at least according to one public reporting. What we do not know, and I've searched this with the AIs and everybody else and myself, is how the remaining vote was distributed. How much went to Raman, how much went to Pratt, how much went out the window. Those numbers remain unknown to us at this time. They may ultimately appear in precinct level election records. They may already exist somewhere in the county's reporting systems, but they are not part of the public discussion. And it matters because the battle for second place exists entirely inside of that remaining slice of the electorate. And that goes for the entirety of the city. Bass's victory is not the mystery. The mystery is what happens to the remaining 18%. And before you wonder what the hell I'm going on about, let's assume for a moment that Raman's surge was entirely legitimate, right? She surges after the election. People were like, oh, I forgot to put this in the mail, whatever. Let's assume every explanation offered by election officials is correct. The numbers should tell that story. If Raman's gains came primarily from university districts or renter-heavy neighborhoods or progressive enclaves where, hipster assholes and stuff like that she already had support, then the final precinct level results should demonstrate exactly that. The arithmetic should work, the geography should work, the demographics should work. But if large portions of her gains from precincts where Bass is already getting 75, 80, or 82%, then people are going to ask questions, not because they're a conspiracy theorist, because they're doing the arithmetic. If Bass, meaning the Socialist Democrats, are already taking 82% of the vote, why would they vote for another Socialist Democrat at the same time? Obviously to figure you're going to put Pratt out of business. But if you have such a staggering lead, you knew that Pratt is not going to be a problem in the second round. And not because these are conspiracy theorists, because they're doing the arithmetic. There is a finite number of votes in every precinct. When one candidate receives 4/5 of them, the remaining voter pool becomes very important. And one of the lessons from the earlier controversy, this less than zero, is that statistics often point us towards questions, not answers, but questions. The election night anomaly led people to begin examining the vote count more carefully. Now we are looking at participation. We're looking at a vote inventory. We're looking at the composition of the late count electorate. And we're asking whether the numbers align with the explanations being offered. Another example, if there are only 5,000 votes left in the entirety of that district and Spencer Pratt gets 3,000 of them legitimately in the early election, and she's going to come back and they're going to say, well, Raman pulled 3,000 or 4,000 out of that neighborhood. How did that happen? That's what people are going to have to look for, is that overlap. Bass and Raman have an overlap because they're working together, kind of. They're not, but they are, but they're not. So you have to make sure that the numbers add up at this point. Okay. And what they're doing with these search engines, you can usually get most things that are out there in the open. These numbers, as of my search, as to Raman and what she's brought in some of these other districts, just don't exist yet. They're crowing about Bass, but how do they have Bass's number and not Raman's number and not Pratt's number? You can see where I'm coming from with this. So where does that leave us? It leaves you waiting for the final precinct level data, which can now be, maybe I went a little too far over on Raman. Maybe I have to reduce a little on Bass because she was still at 75. Let's say she went 75 to 82. I can't explain Raman's surge in that neighborhood. So Bass actually didn't get to 82. We'll say she got to 79, which is still above her 75, which is rational. So now it's going to be money and numbers management. So if you're interested in that, I would go in and take a look at those things myself. Like I said, the Democrats, socialists can only do this kind of stuff in an area where they control the governor's office and they control law enforcement. If they do not have control of those offices, then they will not be able to commit these kind of questionable activities. If it actually happened, which I have to say, if it actually happened, they wouldn't be able to do it unless Gavin Newsom was the governor and who appoints the district attorney, and if the LA Sheriff's Office and LA City PD were not afraid of Karen Bass and her communist buddies. So that's all I have for you for now. Hopefully that's a little something to think about. And that's all we have for today. Goodbye.